had been a long and grueling year for Captain Elias Thorne, but as he stood at the helm of the USA Resolute, gazing into the void of space, he had never felt more at peace. The stars stretched out before him, distant and cold. Yet, in the endless darkness, there was a flicker, a single ember of light in a universe of cold indifference. Thorne's mind was far from calm, however. The war had dragged on for centuries, but now, after years of retreating and barely hanging on, humanity had a single chance to strike back. And it came in the form of the Resolute, an old, retrofitted ship that no one, not even the most ambitious of strategists, would have considered a threat. It wasn't supposed to be anything special, but then it was special, a spark in a dead furnace. He ran a hand through his short-cropped hair and shifted his focus to the ship's sensors. There was a faint hum of activity in the command center behind him. His crew, fully aware of the risks, was going through the motions of routine, but the tension was palpable. It was a quiet sort of battle preparation, one where every soul on board the Resolute was walking on the line between hope and anxiety. They didn't know what awaited them on the other side of the jump. They didn't even know what was going on in the war, the bigger picture. News from the front lines was scarce. Everything had become a grim waiting game. "Captain," came the voice of Lieutenant Maravos, his tactical officer, breaking the silence. "We've got an anomaly. It's strange, sir, almost like a ripple through the subspace fabric." Thorne's eyes narrowed. "Explain." "It's faint, but it's coming from the Drakthar sector," she continued, her voice steady despite the undercurrent of urgency. "It's not normal. Could be a trap, could be an accident. I'm not sure." The Drakthar Empire had been humanity's relentless foe for over a century. An alien race so advanced that they had wiped out entire colonies of human settlers without breaking a sweat. Their ships were terrifying, their weapons far beyond anything humanity had ever developed. The Federation had poured all its resources into countering the Drakthar's advances, but each time they seemed to take 2 steps forward, humanity would fall back 3. The Resolute had been one of the Federation's last bets, a one-off experiment in both tactics and technology. But the idea that it could stand against a Drakthar armada was laughable. A small, aging ship against an empire that spanned thousands of light years. The odds were astronomical. But Thorne knew something the Drakthar didn't. Humanity had an uncanny ability to adapt, to fight even when the odds were insurmountable, to make the impossible happen. He'd seen it before. His crew was the best of the best, daring, resilient, and fiercely determined. "Prepare for a short-range jump," Thorne ordered, his voice cutting through the stillness. "We'll investigate. If it's a trap, we'll be ready." The ship's engines thrummed to life as Voss punched in the coordinates, and in a blink of an eye they were thrust into the unknown. When the Resolute emerged from the jump, the sight that greeted them was not what they expected. Ahead of them a small planet, or rather a shattered moon, hung in space, surrounded by debris. It was quiet. Too quiet. No ships, no movement from the Drakthar fleet, just silence. "Scan the debris," Thorne said, stepping forward, his eyes scanning the empty battlefield. His crew moved with a well-rehearsed efficiency. "Is this recent? What happened here?" Voss's eyes flicked across her console, her brow furrowing. "There's no sign of any Drakthar fleet, but—" She was interrupted by Ensign Doran, the ship's communications officer. "Captain, there's a transmission coming in. It's faint, encrypted." Thorne's interest piqued. "Put it through." A strange, garbled voice came through the speakers, distorted by static. "UN, Resolute, if you are hearing this, please respond. We are in need of immediate assistance. The Black Sun Armada, they came out of nowhere. The message cut off abruptly. Voss looked up from her station. That was human, a Federation distress signal. From where? Thorne asked, narrowing his gaze. Unknown, she replied, analyzing the signal. But it's originating from within the debris field. Thorne's instincts kicked in. There was something off about this. A distress signal from Federation forces meant that something, or someone, had been in serious trouble, and that someone might still be out there. He stood, walking to the helm, and placed a hand on the cool console. We're going in. Prepare a boarding party. No one gets left behind. The Resolute descended toward the debris field, moving carefully through the wreckage of what had once been a sizable fleet. The Federation ships, old and weathered, were hardly recognizable. Some were partially disintegrated, others torn in half. It was a macabre display of destruction. But there was no sign of the enemy. "Captain," Voss said as she ran further scans, "there's something strange. I found a ship in the debris. A large vessel, still intact, but it's emitting no power signatures. It's human." Thorne's gaze snapped to her. "Are you sure?" "Yes, sir, it's the Dawnfire, a Federation battleship, but it's dead. There's no power, no life signs. It's like a ghost ship." A chill ran down Thorne's spine. A ghost ship? The Dawnfire had been a key asset in the Federation's war effort, one of the few ships that could engage Drakthar fleets head-on. For it to be in this state was wrong? "Send the boarding team," Thorne ordered. "We're going to find out what happened here." The Dawnfire was eerily silent as Thorne and his team made their way through the wrecked hull. The interior was dark, save for the flickering emergency lights casting long shadows down the narrow corridors. As they moved deeper into the ship, the strange sense of foreboding grew. Something had happened here, something that made the ship's crew vanish without a trace. Lieutenant Voss led the way, her rifle at the ready. Thorne's mind raced. What could have done this? They reached the central command deck of the ship, and Thorne felt a rush of air, a cold, unnatural chill. He stepped into the room, the walls lined with monitors, all blank, dead. But as his eyes swept across the room, he spotted something that made his heart skip. A single figure stood at the far end of the room, the captain of the Dawnfire, or what was left of them. The body was slumped in a chair, eyes wide open, staring at nothing. "By the stars," Thorne whispered under his breath. "What the hell happened to you?" His crew approached cautiously, weapons drawn, but it was the sight on the console that caught Voss's attention. "It's a transmission, Captain," she said softly, almost to herself. "There's data here, but it's not from any Federation source I recognize. It's old, Captain. Older than the Drakthar. Older than anything I've seen." Thorne stepped forward, intrigued. As Voss decrypted the data, a holographic message flickered to life on the screen. A familiar voice filled the room. "Captain Thorne, you need to hear this," the voice said, distorted but unmistakable. "The Drakthar are not the only enemy out there. There's something worse, something older. The Black Sun Armada. They've found us, and if they are coming for us, you need to be ready." The transmission cut out abruptly, leaving the room in a deathly silence. Thorne's hands clenched into fists. Something was coming, something far more dangerous than the Drakthar, something they weren't prepared for. The Drakthar had thought they were the apex of the galaxy, but now Thorne knew the truth. The real war was just beginning. Back aboard the Resolute, the crew was on edge. Thorne stared out the viewport, his mind whirring. The message from the Dawnfire was no longer just a warning. It was a countdown. The Black Sun Armada was real, and they were coming for humanity. Thorne's jaw tightened as he turned to his crew. "We have no choice now. We're going to hunt this Black Sun Armada down before it hunts us." The crew nodded, grim but resolute. They had no idea what they were facing, but Thorne had never backed down from a fight. And humanity? Humanity never feared what it didn't understand. They faced the unknown with the belief that they could and would win. The Resolute powered up, ready to face a threat that would change the course of the war and the fate of the galaxy itself. The silence of space was a cruel, unsettling thing. It wrapped itself around the crew of the UNC Resolute like a shroud, dampening the hum of engines and the faint whispers of the ship's systems. The crew had already adapted to the weight of war, but the eerie stillness that came after finding the Dawnfire, the ghost ship, was different. It was as though something ancient and forgotten was stirring in the cold depths of the galaxy. And it was watching. Captain Elias Thorne stood at the command deck, his gaze fixed on the view screen. The cold light of distant stars cast sharp shadows across his face, but his thoughts were a million miles away, centered on the mysterious transmission they had intercepted. The voice from the Dawnfire, desperate and fractured, still rang in his mind. "The Black Sun Armada," Thorne repeated to himself under his breath, his voice barely audible against the steady hum of the ship's systems. "What does it mean?" Lieutenant Mara Voss approached, her footsteps soft but deliberate on the deck's steel floor. She had been his most trusted officer for years, and now, as they faced the unknown, her unwavering professionalism was a beacon in the storm. "Captain, I've been going over the decrypted data from the Dawnfire. It's fragmented, but the information is consistent. The Black Sun Armada is not a part of the Drakthar Empire." Thorne turned to face her, his expression grave. "Explain." Voss tapped a few commands on the console, and a 3D hologram of the galaxy flickered to life in the center of the bridge. A vast map of the stars stretched out in front of them. It was their battlefield, the backdrop of the war that had defined humanity's struggle for survival. The map showed a wide swath of space, dotted with the territories of the Federation, the Drakthar Empire, and a handful of other species caught in the conflict. "I cross-referenced the anomalies with every known galaxy-wide military database, and there is no record of the Black Sun Armada. It's as if they've never existed." Voss's brow furrowed in concentration. "The transmissions were centuries old. If they were authentic, they predate the rise of the Drakthar." "This is older than we thought." Thorne's eyes narrowed as he absorbed her words. Something that predated the Drakthar? That was impossible. The Drakthar had always been the great unknown, mysterious, insidious, and terrifying in their technological superiority. Humanity had barely survived against their invasions, let alone made any headway in understanding them. "So you're telling me this Black Sun Armada might be older than the Drakthar?" Thorne asked. "And they've never been documented? How is that even possible?" "I don't know," Voss replied, her voice strained with frustration. "But I'm telling you, Captain, something doesn't add up. These anomalies, the ships, the transmission, they're not part of any known galactic history. They don't belong to any faction we know. They're pre-Drakkar." Thorne turned away from the hologram, his mind racing. Pre-Drakthar. If Voss was right, they were facing a threat unlike anything they had encountered before. A threat that might have been lying dormant, unnoticed, until now. Suddenly, the sharp tone of an incoming transmission sliced through the tension on the bridge. Thorne's gut twisted as he recognized the source. It was from the Federation Central Command. "Put it through," he ordered. A crisp, authoritative voice echoed through the room. "Captain Thorne, this is Admiral Tessa Grant of the Federation High Command. We've received word of your findings. We need you to return to Federation space immediately. This Black Sun Armada threat is something we've only recently become aware of, but we need to assess the situation firsthand." Thorne clenched his fists, his mind made up. They had no time to waste. "Admiral, we can't wait. If this Black Sun Armada is real, then humanity is in grave danger. We have no idea how far this threat goes, and I'm not going to sit around while our people are slaughtered." Admiral Grant's voice softened slightly, but there was no mistaking her authority. "Captain, I understand your urgency, but we need a unified plan. The Federation is not prepared to handle a force we know so little about. You're in uncharted territory. You need to wait for backup." "I can't do that, Admiral," Thorne said, his voice steady but unwavering. "I've seen what the Black Sun Armada is capable of. I won't wait until it's too late. I'll engage them before they get any closer to Federation space." There was a long pause before the Admiral's voice crackled over the comms again. "Very well, Captain, but this is your decision. You're on your own. Proceed with caution." Thorne's expression hardened as the transmission ended. He turned to Voss, who had been silent through the exchange. Her eyes were locked on him, filled with understanding. They both knew what was at stake. "We're going to need a plan," Voss said softly. "I already have one," Thorne replied, turning toward the crew. "We're heading straight into the unknown. Prepare for an extended mission. I want every available resource at our disposal. Voss, you're in charge of gathering intel. We need to know everything we can about these Black Sun anomalies." Voss nodded, but her gaze lingered on the captain for a moment longer. "And if this Black Sun Armada turns out to be more than we can handle?" Thorne met her eyes, his voice low and resolute. "Then we'll make sure the Federation knows we fought with everything we had." The next few hours were a flurry of activity. The crew of the Resolute worked together, their collective focus unwavering as they prepared for the journey into unknown territory. No one spoke of the fear that lingered at the back of their minds. This mission was no longer about strategy or survival. It was about discovering the truth. Lieutenant Voss had already started analyzing every piece of data they had, building a profile of the Black Sun Armada. But there was nothing in the records. No mention of ancient fleets or long-lost species. Not a single reference to the name that had now become a shadow over their mission. As they prepared to jump, Thorne took a moment to sit in the quiet of his captain's quarters. The small metal room felt colder than usual. His eyes lingered on the map of human territories that adorned the wall, scattered with pins and notes from his previous campaigns. Every place marked, every battle fought. He had always been prepared, but this time he wasn't sure what they were walking into. The Resolute was small in comparison to the mighty Drakthar warships. Its weapons were outdated, its hull patched together with scraps from older models. But humanity had learned to make do. Thorne had learned to make do. The Resolute had survived skirmishes no one thought it could win. It had outmaneuvered enemies with the ingenuity that only humans possessed. But this new threat was beyond anything they'd faced before. Thorne had no idea what kind of weaponry the Black Sun Armada had. Would their tactics be as devastating as the Drakthar? Or would they be something worse? "Captain, we're ready to jump." Voss's voice brought him back to reality. "The course is set." Thorne stood and walked to the bridge. "Engage the jump. Let's see what lies beyond the stars." The Resolute surged into hyperspace, the ship shuddering as it broke through the fabric of reality. The stars outside the view screen streaked by in brilliant lines of light. As they entered uncharted space, the crew remained tense, their eyes constantly darting to the sensors, scanning for any sign of the Black Sun Armada. They had no way of knowing how far this mysterious force extended or what kind of power they wielded, but one thing was certain. They had to find out. The Federation had no idea what was coming. Thorne only hoped that they would have enough time to prepare. Hours passed, then days. The blackness of space stretched on endlessly, a vast, oppressive emptiness. But just as the crew began to feel the isolation creeping in, their sensors began to pick up an anomaly. It was faint at first, just a ripple in the subspace fabric, but then it grew stronger. A signal. No, not a signal. A presence. It was something they had never encountered before, something older than anything they had ever imagined. "Captain?" Voss called, her voice filled with awe. "You need to see this." Thorne approached the sensor station, his heart pounding in his chest. There on the screen was something beyond comprehension. A massive, black ship, floating in the void like a leviathan from the depths of legend. It was ancient, it was enormous, and it was unlike anything they had ever seen. The Black Sun Armada had found them. The vastness of space had always made Elias Thorne feel small, a mere speck in a universe of infinite possibilities, but now, staring at the colossal ship suspended in the dark, his insignificance seemed to bleed into the very fabric of his thoughts. It wasn't just the ship's size that awed him. It was its presence. It was alive. Something ancient and unknowable seemed to hum from it, its shape almost alien in its complexity. The Resolute hung in space like a child staring up at the most terrifying thing it had ever seen. Thorne's hands tightened around the armrests of the captain's chair, his knuckles white. Beside him, Lieutenant Mara Voss stared at the strange ship on the view screen. She wasn't speaking, but the tension in her posture said everything. The Black Sun Armada had been nothing more than a name, a myth until now. But this thing was something far worse than any story, any whispered rumor. It was real, and it was here. "Report!" Thorne barked, shaking himself from the hypnotic pull of the ship. His voice was sharp, cutting through the fog of disbelief that had settled over him. Voss quickly began working on the console, her fingers flying over the keys as her eyes scanned the readings. "Captain, I'm not sure how to explain this," she said, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "The energy signatures are wrong. It's not just the ship. The entire space around it seems distorted, like it's bending reality itself." "Bending reality?" Thorne echoed, disbelief curling in his voice. "What do you mean?" "I can't get a clear read on it. There's interference, Captain. The ship's hull, it's almost like it's phasing in and out of normal space. It doesn't belong here." Voss's voice was taut. "I've never seen anything like it. It's like looking at an impossible object through a broken mirror." Thorne nodded slowly. If this ship was anything like the data suggested, something older, beyond the reach of human technology, it could very well be more powerful than anything they had ever encountered. The Drakthar, for all their technology and cruelty, were nothing compared to this. "This ship, Voss, it's like it's been waiting for us." Thorne muttered, more to himself than to her. "Waiting for what?" Voss asked, her eyes still glued to the screen. "Us," Thorne said, the weight of the realization beginning to sink in. "Humanity. This ship was built by something that existed before the Drakthar, and I have a sinking feeling that we've just woken it up." Hours passed as the crew of the Resolute continued to monitor the colossal ship. They dared not approach it directly, but every scan, every reading confirmed what they already suspected. The Black Sun Armada was not merely a fleet of warships. It was a living entity, one that could bend the very fabric of reality around it. The crew moved like clockwork, working tirelessly to uncover the secrets of the ship, but Thorne felt something heavier than fatigue settling over him. The uncertainty gnawed at him. How could humanity stand against something that had waited millennia to reemerge? "Captain," Voss called, her voice uncharacteristically soft. I found something. It's a transmission. Old, but it's in the ship's database. It's a message, encoded in a pattern I don't recognize, but it's definitely a call for something. A warning. Put it through, Thorne said, leaning forward in his chair. He had to know more. This was their first chance to understand the enemy. Maybe even their only chance. The room went still as the crackling sound of static filled the air. A distorted voice, ancient and garbled, echoed through the comm system. It was a voice Thorne didn't recognize, one that sent a chill through his spine. The time is nigh. The black sun rises. The stars will fall and the darkness will consume. The transmission was short, cutting off abruptly, but the words lingered in the air, heavy with meaning. Thorne exchanged a look with Voss, who had turned pale. "What does it mean?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't know," Thorne replied, his mind racing. "But I don't think it's a coincidence. The Black Sun Armada, it's not just a fleet. It's part of something bigger. Something ancient." Voss turned back to the console, her eyes scanning the data in front of her. "Captain, there's more. This ship, it's a relic. It's designed to interface with something else. It has systems that don't even make sense. The power grid here is connected to something vast, something that can control entire systems of space-time." Thorne's stomach twisted at the implication. If this ship could control space-time, then nothing, no military might, no strategic planning, could protect humanity. The Black Sun Armada wasn't just an enemy, it was a force of nature, a force that could unravel the universe itself. "What are we looking at, Voss?" Thorne asked, his voice low. "This ship, Captain," she said slowly. "It's not just a weapon, it's a key. A key to something far worse than we've imagined." As the crew of the Resolute worked to uncover more about the Black Sun and its origins, Thorne found himself standing at the helm of his ship, staring out at the enormous relic in the distance. He hadn't slept in days, the constant influx of information preventing him from even closing his eyes for a moment. But now, with the stakes rising higher by the hour, sleep seemed irrelevant. He wasn't alone on the bridge. Voss was at her station, eyes glued to her console, her mind working overtime to process the data. Ensign Doran sat nearby, listening intently for any further communications. But Thorne couldn't shake the feeling that something else was out there, lurking in the dark, something that had been awakened the moment they found the Black Sun Armada. Suddenly the sensors began to ping wildly and the entire bridge snapped into alert. "Captain," Voss shouted. "Incoming transmission. It's not from the ship, it's a fleet." Thorne's heart skipped a beat as he turned to look at her. "A fleet? Where? How many?" "Coming from the edge of the Black Sun anomaly," she replied, her fingers flying across the console. "I can't get a clear reading, but there are multiple ships and they're heading straight toward us. Whatever we've found here, Captain, it's not just a relic. It's a signal." "A signal for who?" Thorne asked, his voice tight with anticipation. "For the Armada," Voss answered grimly. "For them." Thorne's mind raced. The Black Sun Armada had been waiting for something. The transmission, the distorted voice. It was all a call, a signal that now seemed to be drawing more ships. A fleet was converging on them, a fleet unlike any they had encountered. "Brace for impact," Thorne shouted, leaping to his feet. "Prepare for battle." The Resolute shot forward, the engines roaring to life as it zipped through the inky blackness of space. The fleet was out there, somewhere in the void, and it was coming fast. The crew scrambled to their stations, the bridge now a flurry of motion. The weapons officer, Petty Officer Klein, was already inputting commands, preparing the ship's aging cannons for a fight. Thorne could feel the tremor in his hands as he grabbed the armrests of his chair once more, watching as the view screen flickered and sputtered. "We've got multiple contacts, Captain," Doran shouted. His eyes were wide with disbelief. They're They're huge. These ships, they're unlike anything we've ever seen. The view screen cleared, revealing the approaching fleet. Thorne's heart dropped into his stomach. Dozens of ships, unlike any known warship, moved forward in tight formation. They were sleek, angular, and dark, almost obsidian-like, their surfaces absorbing the light, giving them an ethereal, ghostly quality. The ships were massive, dwarfing even the largest Federation battleships. They had no clear weaponry on display, yet Thorne could sense their lethality. The ships seemed to pulse with an ancient energy, their forms shifting in the space around them as though they were not entirely anchored in reality. "This is it," Thorne whispered, his voice a low rasp. "This is the Black Sun Armada." A deep, resonant hum filled the comm system, followed by a chilling voice that seemed to echo from the very heart of the universe itself. "You have awakened us." It was not just a voice, it was a presence, a force. Thorne felt it invade his very bones. "They're here," Voss murmured, her voice trembling. "The end of humanity is here." But Thorne refused to let fear take hold. He had faced impossible odds before, and he would do again. "We fight," he said, his voice firm. "For humanity, for everyone who has ever fought for a future.